signs.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington, where we are counting down the days to June 27th. The first presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump set to take place in Atlanta next Tuesday. And between now and then, voters, especially in swing states, are going to be seeing a new ad from President Biden setting the stage for the debate that specifically focuses on Donald Trump's record in court and his recent 34 convictions on felony counts of falsifying business records. This is a $50 million ad buy. And here is a little clip.
This election is between a convicted criminal who's only out for himself and a president who's fighting for your family.
The ad, Joe, is titled Character Matters.
Yeah, that's the race there, I guess, in the eyes of the Biden campaign. It's between a convicted criminal out for himself or this president who is fighting for families. $50 million is a good chunk of cash, and it's where we start our conversation with our signature panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. There have been a lot of questions, Jeannie, about when Joe Biden was going to put the money to work. This is the most recent example. This approach, character matters. Matters to whom?
They want it to matter to voters in these swing states. And I think the key here is the tagline that we keep hearing, only out for himself. The reality is we heard that from Jill Biden, the first lady, at the big fundraiser over the weekend. And we've heard it from the campaign managers. Donald Trump, is only out for himself. The conviction is making him, even more animated and energized to get back in office so he can, try to pardon himself, which he can't from a state trial. But the reality is they want to make this case on everything from the convictions to the economy, that this is all about Trump and his billionaire friends. So I think it's something we're going to hear a lot in the coming weeks.
Well, Donald Trump may be a billionaire, Rick, but we've been talking this entire cycle thus far about his cash disadvantage when it comes to the Biden campaign. He had a really big month of May, though. We still haven't gotten May figures from Biden. We know he raised $30 million in Hollywood just this weekend with George Clooney and Barack Obama beside him. But a $50 million ad buy is a pretty big chunk of the war chest. Is that a wise financial decision?
I think it's questionable. Clearly, running ads in the summer is less effective than husbanding your resources and running them in the fall. It's pretty clear that voters tune in September when the trees start to change and people start thinking about the election. That being said, I think the Biden campaign is rightly concerned about their standing in the polls. They're rightly concerned about the positioning that the candidate is in, which has generally been trailing Donald Trump for the last 6 months. And I think they're trying to do something about it, especially before all the attention on the debates and the conventions. And so, long story short, yeah, I think he's going to roll the dice. He's going to spend $50 million. I think they think money's not going to be the issue in closing this campaign. And, they got to do what they can to try and get the candidate back in a better position, which in this case means driving negatives up on Donald Trump. This ad's not going to help Joe Biden get more popular, but it may help drive Donald Trump down to be less popular than Joe Biden.
And to that end, new numbers today from IPSOS and Politico magazine. Interesting, Jeannie. We've seen a bit of research since Donald Trump's conviction, but not enough to really understand a trend, if there is one. In this case, 21% of independents said the conviction made them less likely to support Donald Trump. So is this campaign just about reminding them this happened?
It is partly about that. And yeah, the idea that they're finding in this poll that his conviction, despite the big amount of money they've raised off of it, could be a liability when people go to the polls is, what we're beginning to see in some of this polls. I don't think this is something we can take to the bank, so to speak, at this point, because we've also seen some numbers suggesting Donald Trump is doing better after the conviction. But this is a fairly hopeful, if you will, sign for the Biden team that they should keep talking about the idea of a convicted felon serving as president being something that most voters will not, or many voters in the independent lane will not countenance. And the other interesting thing I think we should pay attention to is Donald Trump losing support amongst 65 plus. His numbers amongst seniors are down. A Republican has not lost a 65 plus since before 2000. So the idea that his numbers are down there even a little bit and in swing states, that's a big problem for Donald Trump and a big win for Joe Biden. So there have been some of these positive signs, mildly positive, I would say, in the polling numbers we're seeing in the last few weeks.
Rick, what's your take on these figures? As mentioned, 21% of independents said the conviction is important to how they will vote, and it means they are less likely to support Trump. Perhaps not surprisingly, 40% of Democrats had that answer. Only 7% of Republicans, the total being 22%. But when we're talking about such a small portion of the electorate that is likely to decide the outcome, Rick, are those numbers enough?
It just depends on which state. I would say in states like the blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where the numbers have been in a dead heat, you're looking for sort of what positives you can find. This is a positive, right? This could be 25,000, 100,000 people per state who might be less likely to vote. I think part of what this poll also told us, the IPSOS poll asked you, and is this a very important item? Because we know a lot of people would be less likely to vote if they knew the candidate you were running against was a criminal. But does that really make a big difference to them in their decision? And a substantial number, almost 20%, said yes. So that is really interesting to me, that someone would actually decide the outcome of their vote on this conviction. So I think in those states, it's critically important. In states where they've migrated to 5-10 points difference between each other, it's just on the margins at that stage. But right now, I don't think you can really rely on anybody's polls but the candidates. And clearly, Biden took a poll and tested this and said it's worth investing $50 million behind a message because they see it helping them.
Rick, I wonder your thoughts on the optics over the weekend. Donald Trump in Detroit asking black voters for their support. Joe Biden out west in California sharing a stage with the Glitterati. He was there with Barack Obama, Jimmy Kimmel on stage. Julia Roberts is there, George Clooney as the man behind the famous celebrity ad that John McCain ran against Barack Obama. Do you see an opening here?
You know, look, I think they're just chasing the changes in the electorate. I mean, we've been talking about Joe Biden's electorate now being older, whiter, more educated, more likely to be influenced by Hollywood than Donald Trump's, who is more working class, lacks college education, and frankly more multicultural. I mean, he is picking up especially young black males into his coalition. He could wind up receiving 20% of that vote in the election, which would be a really amazing historical level for a Republican candidate. And so it has as much to do with education as it does with color. It has as much to do with location, living outside of cities versus in them. And so I think this was a perfect weekend. It shows you really how the parties have become restructured to the point where it's starting to show up in the things that they do and the contrasts they make. Hollywood versus, you know, a black church in the Midwest.
Well, and with this Hollywood event, as we mentioned, about $30 million was raised by the Biden campaign. Jeannie, the FEC deadline to put in fundraising data for the month of May is later this week. We already heard from the Trump campaign several weeks ago, $141 million raised in May, in large part off the back of his guilty verdict. Does it concern you that we haven't heard anything from the Biden campaign yet? We might not until they actually are forced to by that deadline?
Yeah, I think that we're waiting to see. I mean, it would be really tough to match what the Trump campaign was able to do. Those were big numbers. That said, the 28 million over the weekend was historic for on the Democratic side. And I think also important about that event, putting the celebrities aside, was the message that Joe Biden was able to get out, which is a warning about the impact on the court if Donald Trump wins, which is likely two more appointees who are going to solidify a conservative majority, likely to take away key freedoms and rights until your grandkids and great grandkids potentially are adults. I mean, this is a really important message that they're underscoring, and I think we're going to hear more about that. So the celebrities were fascinating, but the message is critical, and they've got to use this money they're raising to get that message out. Democrats don't traditionally vote on the court, but given we're at the 2-year anniversary of Dobbs, that's what we've seen happening in the last 24 months.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our Bloomberg Politics contributors, kicking things off for us on this Monday. Thank you so much. Now let's get